Chapters 5 and 6 of Book 3 of Les Misérables, Volume 4 by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dave Dwight. Les Misérables, Volume 4 by Victor Hugo, translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. Book 3, The House in the Rue Plumet. Chapter 5. The Rose Perceives that it is an Engine of War. One day, Cosette chanced to look at herself in her mirror, and she said to herself, "Really?" It seemed to her almost that she was pretty. This threw her in a singularly troubled state of mind. Up to that moment, she had never thought of her face. She saw herself in her mirror, but she did not look at herself. And then she had so often been told that she was homely. Jean Valjean alone said gently, "No, indeed. No, indeed." At all events, Cosette had always thought herself homely, and had grown up in that belief with the easy resignation of childhood. And here, all at once, was her mirror saying to her, as Jean Valjean had said, "No, indeed." That night she did not sleep. What if I were pretty, she thought. How odd it would be if I were pretty. And she recalled those of her companions whose beauty had produced a sensation in the convent, and she said to herself, "What? Am I to be like Mademoiselle So-and-so?" The next morning she looked at herself again, not by accident this time, and she was assailed with doubts. "Where did I get such an idea?" said she. "No, I am ugly." She had not slept well, that was all. Her eyes were sunken and she was pale. She had not felt very joyous on the preceding evening in the belief that she was beautiful, but it made her very sad not to be able to believe in it any longer. She did not look at herself again, and for more than a fortnight she tried to dress her hair with her back turned to the mirror. In the evening, after dinner, she generally embroidered in wool, or did some convent needlework in the drawing-room, and Jean Valjean read beside her. Once she raised her eyes from her work, and she was rendered quite uneasy by the manner in which her father was gazing at her. On another occasion, she was passing along the street, and it seemed to her that someone behind her, whom she did not see, said, "A pretty woman, but badly dressed." "Bah!" she thought. "He does not mean me. I am well dressed and ugly." She was then wearing a plush hat and her merino gown. At last, one day when she was in the garden, she heard poor old Toussaint saying, "Do you notice how pretty Cosette is growing, sir?" Cosette did not hear her father's reply. But Toussaint's words caused a sort of commotion within her. She fled from the garden, ran up to her room, flew to the looking-glass. It was 3 months since she had looked at herself, and gave vent to a cry. She had just dazzled herself. She was beautiful and lovely. She could not help agreeing with Toussaint and her mirror. Her figure was formed, her skin had grown white, her hair was lustrous, an unaccustomed splendor had been lighted in her blue eyes. The consciousness of her beauty burst upon her in an instant, like the sudden advent of daylight. Other people noticed it also. Toussaint had said so. It was evidently she of whom the passer-by had spoken. There could no longer be any doubt of that. She descended to the garden again, thinking herself a queen, imagining that she heard the birds singing, though it was winter, seeing the sky gilded, the sun among the trees, flowers in the thickets, distracted, wild, in inexpressible delight. Jean Valjean, on his side, experienced a deep and undefinable oppression at heart. In fact, he had, for some time past, been contemplating with terror that beauty which seemed to grow more radiant every day on Cosette's sweet face. The dawn that was smiling for all was gloomy for him. Cosette had been beautiful for a tolerably long time before she became aware of it herself. But from the very first day, that unexpected light which was rising slowly and enveloping the whole of the young girl's person wounded Jean Valjean's sombre eye. He felt that it was a change in a happy life, a life so happy that he did not dare to move for fear of disarranging something. This man, who had passed through all manner of distresses, who was still all bleeding from the bruises of fate, who had been almost wicked, and who had become almost a saint, who, after having dragged the chains of the galleys, was now dragging the invisible but heavy chain of indefinite misery. This man whom the law had not released from its grasp, and who could be seized at any moment and brought back from the obscurity of his virtue to the broad daylight of public opprobrium, this man accepted all, excused all, pardoned all, and merely asked of Providence, of man, of the law, of society, of nature, of the world, one thing, that Cosette might love him, that Cosette might continue to love him, that God would not prevent the heart of the child from coming to him and from remaining with him. Beloved by Cosette, he felt that he was healed, rested, appeased, loaded with benefits, recompensed, crowned. Beloved by Cosette, it was well with him. He asked nothing more. Had anyone said to him, "Do you want anything better?" he would have answered, "No." God might have said to him, "Do you desire heaven?" and he would have replied, "I should lose by it." Everything which could affect this situation, if only on the surface, made him shudder like the beginning of something new. He had never known very distinctly himself what the beauty of a woman means, but he understood instinctively that it was something terrible. He gazed with terror on this beauty, which was blossoming out ever more triumphant and superb beside him, beneath his very eyes, on the innocent and formidable brow of that child, from the depths of her homeliness, of his old age, of his misery, of his reprobation. He said to himself, "How beautiful she is! What is to become of me?" There, moreover, lay the difference between his tenderness and the tenderness of a mother. What he beheld with anguish, a mother would have gazed upon with joy. The first symptoms were not long in making their appearance. On the very morrow of the day on which she had said to herself, "Decidedly I am beautiful," Cosette began to pay attention to her toilet. She recalled the remark of that passer-by, pretty but badly dressed. The breath of an oracle, which had passed beside her and had vanished, after depositing in her heart one of the two gems which are destined, later on, to fill the whole life of woman, coquetry. Love is the other. With faith in her beauty, the whole feminine soul expanded within her. She conceived a horror for her merinos, and shame for her plush hat. Her father had never refused her anything. She had once acquired the whole science of the bonnet, the gown, the mantle, the boot, the cuff, the stuff which is in fashion, the color which is becoming, that science which makes of the Parisian woman something so charming, so deep, and so dangerous. The words heady woman were invented for the Parisienne. In less than a month, little Cosette, in the tabac of the Rue de Babylone, was not only one of the prettiest, but one of the best dressed women in Paris, which means a great deal more. She would have liked to encounter her passer-by to see what he would say, and to teach him a lesson. The truth is that she was ravishing in every respect, and that she distinguished the difference between a bonnet from Giraud and one from Herbaut in the most marvelous way. Jean Valjean watched these ravages with anxiety. He who felt that he could never do anything but crawl, walk at the most, beheld wings sprouting on Cosette. Moreover, from the mere inspection of Cosette's toilet, a woman would have recognized the fact that she had no mother. Certain little proprieties, certain special conventionalities were not observed by Cosette. A mother, for instance, would have told her that a young girl does not dress in damask. The first day that Cosette went out in her black damask gown and mantle and her white crape bonnet, she took Jean Valjean's arm, gay, radiant, rosy, proud, dazzling. "Father," she said, "how do you like me in this guise?" Jean Valjean replied in a voice which resembled the bitter voice of an envious man, "Charming." He was the same as usual during their walk. On their return home, he asked Cosette, "Won't you put on the other gown and bonnet again? You know the ones I mean." This took place in Cosette's chamber. Cosette turned towards the wardrobe where her cast-off schoolgirl's clothes were hanging. "That disguise," said she. "Father, what do you want me to do with it? Oh, no, the idea! I shall never put on those horrors again. With that machine on my head, I have the air of Madame Mad Dog." Jean Valjean heaved a deep sigh. From that moment forth he noticed that Cosette, who had always heretofore asked to remain at home, saying, "Father, I enjoy myself more here with you," now was always asking to go out. In fact, what is the use of having a handsome face and a delicious costume if one does not display them? He also noticed that Cosette had no longer the same taste for the back garden. Now she preferred the garden, and did not dislike to promenade back and forth in front of the railed fence. Jean Valjean, who was shy, never set foot in the garden. He kept to his backyard, like a dog. Cosette, in gaining the knowledge that she was beautiful, lost the grace of ignoring it. An exquisite grace, for beauty enhanced by ingenuousness, is ineffable, and nothing is so adorable as a dazzling and innocent creature who walks along, holding in her hand the key to paradise, without being conscious of it. But what she had lost in an ingenuous grace, she gained in pensive and serious charm. Her whole person, permeated with the joy of youth, of innocence, and of beauty, breathed forth a splendid melancholy. It was at this epoch that Marius, after the lapse of 6 months, saw her once more at the Luxembourg. Chapter 6. The battle begun. Cosette in her shadow, like Marius in his, was all ready to take fire. Destiny, with its mysterious and fatal patience, slowly drew together these two beings, all charged and all languishing with the stormy electricity of passion, these two souls which were laden with love, as two clouds are laden with lightning, and which were bound to overflow and mingle in a look like the clouds in a flash of fire. The glance had been so much abused in love romances that it has finally fallen into disrepute. One hardly dares to say nowadays that two beings fell in love because they looked at each other. That is the way people do fall in love, nevertheless, and the only way. The rest is nothing, but the rest comes afterwards. Nothing is more real than these great shocks which two souls convey to each other by the exchange of that spark. At that particular hour, when Cosette unconsciously darted that glance which troubled Marius, Marius had no suspicion that he had also launched a look which disturbed Cosette. He caused her the same good and the same evil. She had been in the habit of seeing him for a long time, and she had scrutinized him as girls scrutinize and see, while looking elsewhere. Marius still considered Cosette ugly, when she had already begun to think Marius handsome. But as he paid no attention to her, the young man was nothing to her. Still, she could not refrain from saying to herself that he had beautiful hair, beautiful eyes, handsome teeth, a charming tone of voice when she heard him conversing with his comrades, that he held himself badly when he walked, if you like, but with a grace that was all his own, that he did not appear to be at all stupid, that his whole person was noble, gentle, simple, proud, and that, in short, though he seemed to be poor, yet his air was fine. On the day when their eyes met at last, and said to each other those first obscure and ineffable things which the glance lisps, Cosette did not immediately understand. She returned thoughtfully to the house in the Rue de l'Ouest, where Jean Valjean, according to his custom, had come to spend 6 weeks. The next morning, on waking, she thought of that strange young man, so long indifferent and icy, who now seemed to pay attention to her, and it did not appear to her that his attention was the least in the world agreeable to her. She was, on the contrary, somewhat incensed at this handsome and disdainful individual. A substratum of war stirred within her. It struck her, and the idea caused her a wholly childish joy that she was going to take her revenge at last. Knowing that she was beautiful, she was thoroughly conscious, though in an indistinct fashion, that she possessed a weapon. Women play with their beauty as children do with a knife. They wound themselves. The reader will recall Marius's hesitations, his palpitations, his terrors. He remained on his bench and did not approach. This vexed Cosette. One day she said to Jean Valjean, "Father, let us stroll about a little in that direction. Seeing that Marius did not come to her, she went to him. In such cases, all women resemble Mahomet. And then, strange to say, the first symptom of true love in a young man is timidity. In a young girl, it is boldness. This is surprising, and yet nothing is more simple. It is the two sexes tending to approach each other and assuming each the other's qualities. That day, Cosette's glance drove Marius beside himself, and Marius's glance set Cosette to trembling. Marius went away confident, and Cosette uneasy. From that day forth, they adored each other. The first thing that Cosette felt was a confused and profound melancholy. It seemed to her that her soul had become black since the day before. She no longer recognized it. The whiteness of soul in young girls, which is composed of coldness and gaiety, resembles snow. It melts in love, which is its sun. Cosette did not know what love was. She had never heard the word uttered in its terrestrial sense. On the books of profane music which entered the convent, amour, love, was replaced by timbre, drum, or pandore. This created enigmas which exercised the imaginations of the big girls, such as, "Ah, how delightful is the drum!" or, "Pity it is not a pandore." But Cosette had left the convent too early to have occupied herself much with the drum. Therefore, she did not know what name to give to what she now felt. Is any one the less ill because one does not know the name of one's malady? She loved with all the more passion because she loved ignorantly. She did not know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, useful or dangerous, eternal or temporary, allowable or prohibited. She loved. She would have been greatly astonished had anyone said to her, "You do not sleep? But that is forbidden. You do not eat? Why, that is very bad. You have oppressions and palpitations of the heart? That must not be. You blush and turn pale when a certain being clad in black appears at the end of a certain green walk? But that is abominable." She would not have understood, and she would have replied, "What fault is there of mine in a matter in which I have no power and of which I know nothing?" It turned out that the love which presented itself was exactly suited to the state of her soul. It was a sort of admiration at a distance, a mute contemplation, the deification of a stranger. It was the apparition of youth to youth, the dream of nights become a reality, yet remaining a dream, the longed-for phantom realized and made flesh at last, but having as yet neither name, nor fault, nor spot, nor exigence, nor defect. In a word, the distant lover who lingered in the ideal, a chimera but with a form. Any nearer and more palpable meeting would have alarmed Cosette at this first stage, when she was still half immersed in the exaggerated mists of the cloister. She had all the fears of children and all the fears of nuns combined. The spirit of the convent, with which she had been permeated for the space of 5 years, was still in the process of slow evaporation from her person, and made everything tremble around her. In this situation he was not a lover. He was not even an admirer. He was a vision. She set herself to adoring Marius as something charming, luminous, and impossible. As extreme innocence borders on extreme coquetry, she smiled at him with all frankness. Every day she looked forward to the hour for their walk with impatience. She found Marius there, she felt herself unspeakably happy, and thought in all sincerity that she was expressing her whole thought when she said to Jean Valjean, "What a delicious garden the Luxembourg is." Marius and Cosette were in the dark as to one another. They did not address each other. They did not salute each other. They did not know each other. They saw each other, and, like the stars of heaven, which are separated by millions of leagues, they lived by gazing at each other. It was thus that Cosette gradually became a woman and developed, beautiful and loving, with a consciousness of her beauty and in ignorance of her love. She was a coquette to boot through her ignorance. End of Book 3, Chapters 5 and 6. Recording by Dave Dwight. Southern Illinois.